Now, um, here in uh oh, what is that? Sorry, I'm using a system that I haven't used in a while, and it's got new features. So it just popped up and said, "Hey, you've got you're live." So I guess we're live on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Riverside if you want to come watch us on the app we're recording on. So anyway, it's just me because it's a holiday here in the US, and so AJ and Steve apparently have other things going on and didn't show up. Dan said he has very good reasons for not being here. He usually has very good reasons when he's not here. And our guest, honestly, we just switched over to this system. And so I am going to chalk that up to essentially accounting or process error, right? Um, he probably tried to go to the StreamYard link. Um, that's some kind of messed up. They actually lost some of our recordings when we switched because I guess they're happy with us for switching, or I don't know. I shouldn't imply any motives because I don't actually know if it was malice or incompetence, but I'm working with them to try and figure it out, and they basically told me to quit asking for help. So we'll see how all of that goes. But we switched from StreamYard or to Riverside, and it turns out Riverside has pretty much all the features that I've been asking StreamYard for. So, and they're cheaper. So at the end of the day, that's that. I'm not sad that we switched. Um, if you're looking to do more live streaming, then StreamYard does have better features. But it looks like Riverside's features have come a long way since we switched off of them, and it wasn't terribly hard to hook it up. So I'm pretty happy here, and maybe we'll dive into that, or maybe I'll do an episode on how to record podcasts. But in the meantime, since no one showed up, I thought, hey, I'm just gonna get on and I'm just gonna record, just talk about some war stories, or essentially what I wanted to do is just talk about the highlights of my career. And I don't want to just get into, hey, look how great I am. What I want to do is I want to talk about, hey, I was in these positions and these were the things that really helped me get ahead, or these were the things that really helped me learn, or things like that. And that way I can kind of give you ideas if you're feeling stuck, or if you're like, why am I not happy in this job, or whatever. um just give you a chance to hear, oh, okay, maybe I should try that, right? Or maybe I should take this kind of a leap, or things like that. So, just to give a little bit of background, um, I took electronics classes in high school, and that was kind of my thing, and I really enjoyed it. We actually did get into programming some 8085 or 8088 chips, right? So we would write programs, and it would make LEDs light up, right? And so we were programming the native language of the 8088, which was assembly language. And we also built some robots that would follow a line and things like that. And so I've always kind of had that bent toward technology. My grandpa actually was an inventor, and he invented a smaller ellipsometer, which is a device that tests the or the oxidation coating on silicon wafers that are used to make chips. Right, they have to be uniform or pretty close to uniform, and we're talking. The term he always used was angstroms, which is like the thickness of a oxygen atom or something. I can't remember which atom it is, but so it had to be that accurate on the coating, or you get bad chips. And so he invented a system that would do. They had ellipsometers, but they would take a long time. They were really slow and they were really big. And he invented one that fit basically in the size of kind of a computer case, and he could swap the wafers out every few minutes, right? So instead of taking hours, it take minutes. He also was involved in the after the Challenger, the shuttle, blew up in the 80s. He was working for a company called Rockwell International, and he invented a laser system that checked the inside of the solid rocket booster for impurities, because apparently that contributed to the O-rings failing. And so Anyway, he had pictures up in his office of this device that was sitting and pointed at the side of the rocket boosters. Um, so anyway, so I came across all of the interest in tech kind of honestly, right? He kind of took me under his wing, and um, and so I was always interested in this kind of a thing. And he invented some other stuff that I don't know that anybody would ever use. He built himself literally this chair. So he liked to fly remote control airplanes, which honestly is something that I think would be fun to get into. But he built himself a chair, and he built himself like the yoke for the pilot's chair. So it was a pilot's chair, and he built it so that, and it had pulleys and stuff in it, so that he could put the remote in there and he could fly the airplane as if he were the pilot, right? And so he could turn the yoke, and he could pull it in and out to make it go up and down. And anyway, I have fond memories of climbing trees to retrieve his airplanes at the remote control airplane parks. But anyway, so I got into that. I In high school we were building that stuff, and then after high school, when I went to college, I signed up as an electrical engineering major. I went on a 2-year mission to Italy, and I lived in Italy for 2 years and taught the gospel. That's not really relevant to this, but if you're Italian and you want to chat, I would love to practice my Italian. But yeah, so then I came back and I started working on my degree for electrical engineering. And as I got further in, some of the classes that they make you take are more related to chip design and how computers work and things like that. And I enjoyed that a whole lot more than some of the just esoteric and deeper electrical engineering stuff. So I changed my major to computer engineering. Um, I had to take some computer science classes as part of either major, and so I picked up some programming in college. I also did some programming on an 8085 or a TI-85 calculator that I had when I was in junior high, but it was mostly just so I could do my homework and do it faster than just punching everything in. But yeah, so I started taking these classes, and I have to say that after taking that many computer science classes, I knew for a fact I didn't want to be a programmer, which is kind of funny to a lot of people. It's like, oh, really? Yeah. I was not so keen on that. I got a job working IT at the university, and so um, I set up probably dozens of Linux servers and Windows servers in the data center. The first few years I worked there, I actually worked in the data center, and so we would monitor batch jobs and um, you know get into the computers and run commands and stuff like that. So help just maintain the network. So and so's having an issue on the network, so we'd get in and check the configuration on the switches across campus and things like that. So I do have kind of a strong bent and pretty pretty good familiarity with the command line, and that has really served me well over the years. If you're looking for a skill set that a lot of programmers don't have a good basis in, that will help you out long term, boy, I can tell you, learning the command line and learning how Linux works will do you a world of good, and it's translated really nicely into areas like Docker. So just putting it out there, if that's something that you're looking to it's like, okay, what can I learn that makes me more competitive and a better programmer and things like that, then um anyway, yeah, that was something that really made a big difference. Hang on, I've got to respond to this message real quick. Usually I have co-hosts that will talk while I do this, but this is something that's timely. I got some people doing an install right now, and I'm the technology specialist for the church. And so I have to respond to them. I'm sorry. If you're watching this live. This will all get edited out otherwise. All right. It was a longer message, otherwise I would have just ignored it. All right. So anyway, so that kind of gives you some background before I got that first job. And incidentally, that job out of college. So I had some other jobs. I left the IT job to go take an internship where I was actually writing patent applications because I thought I wanted to be a patent attorney. And yeah, I figured out real quick that that wasn't really my cup of tea. So I went back, worked in IT a little longer, setting up servers, things like that. We used VMware on the servers, and so we got multiple servers on the same hardware. And then I got hired at Mosey, and Mosey, I was working for them, answering support, mostly emails. They expanded. They put out a pro product for businesses, and so then we were doing phone calls as well. And this is where I really got into programming, and I figured out that I loved programming. And the difference was that we had this problem where we needed to be able to keep better track because there were two of us, and we were answering emails in Thunderbird, which is an email client. And so what we would do is we would just grab the next unread or unreplied, and we would start working on it. And sometimes we would figure out that the other guy was working on it too. And we were getting enough support requests to where we were starting to need other people. And so we were going to have to hire a team. And so it just wasn't going to work. And so we went to our boss, who incidentally we found out later that we're related. His mom and my mom are cousins. But we just hadn't really done anything with his family because they lived in California and we lived in Utah. Um, but anyway, so we went to him and we said, "Hey, look, we need something better to manage the emails coming in and stuff like that." And he looked at us and basically said that he didn't have budget for it. And so we started building it, and the technology that they were using at Mosey for the web-based technology was Ruby on Rails. And so we started building this system in Ruby on Rails, and essentially, what it would do is it would ingest the emails periodically, and then what it would do is if one of us loaded the email, it would put a mutex, or basically lock it for 10 minutes or something on the server, on the database, so that if I opened the email, he wouldn't open it, right, and for 10 minutes. And so then if I replied, then it would be marked as replied, and he would never see it, the other guy. And so then when we hired more people, then they could just get in and they could do it well. It also turned out that like 80% of the people who were requesting help were also requesting the same, probably handful of issues. And so we put in canned replies, and we basically said, um, "Hey, look, we're here's your answer." So um yeah. So sorry, I have another message. I'm just passing it back and forth. So anyway, so that was the deal. But what was really interesting was that the issue that I had with programming, and the reason I didn't want to be a programmer based on my computer science stuff, was that I wasn't solving real problems, right? I had no stake in it other than my grade. And some of the problems felt kind of contrived, right? It was like, hey, we're going to make up a problem for you to solve that nobody cares about, right? And so I didn't feel like I was making a difference. And I realized working for Mosey that that was something that I really cared about. And so when I talk to people now about their careers and where they're going and what they want to learn and things like that, it's like, look, what gives you fulfillment at work, right? Because some people I figured out, and for me, some of this applies, but the biggest thing for me is I want to feel like I'm making a difference. So for me, usually I'm looking for opportunities to mentor other people. I'm looking for opportunities to save a big pile of money for my employer, right? It's like, hey, we made the application, 6 times more efficient. So you don't have to pay for, whatever server and other um the other systems, right? You don't have to pay for all of that, right? So or we clean up the code, right? And so it's like, hey, we can get the programming done faster when we need new features, or it's more easy to maintain, or we catch more bugs and because we have a better test suite or things like that, right? So for me, I really want to move the needle. I want somebody to look at the work I did and say, wow, that changed the complexion of things for us, right? So in the contract I'm working right now, right? We figured out that it was doing a whole bunch of repeat work in the workers that were, it's like, hey, do this job. Well, it turned out that a lot of times when it said, hey, do this job, effectively what it was doing is it was saying do this work, but the work was going to be done by a job that was already in the queue. And so I set it up to just look in the queue and say, are you already going to do this work? Okay, don't schedule it. And we got less complaints from the client, right? Because they're like, it's not calculating all the time, right? It's telling us it actually finished the calculation so we can use the numbers that are in there. This is for a hedge fund, by the way. So so those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for, right? Is this like, I mean, I like getting paid, right? And I need to get paid. But the reality is at the end of the day, I'm really looking for that place where I can just knock it out of the park. So um, anyway, I decided that I wanted to be a programmer, right? Because at Mosey, I was still running the support. I had hired at that point like 30 people to work for me, answering support issues. Um, but what I really love to do was work on this system. And eventually we had built out like a full ticketing system. We had added in a knowledge base. Right. We tracked phone calls. I mean, the whole 9 yards, because they had brought in an asterisk um, phone system, which ran on MySQL. So we could query it from Rails. Right. And so we were tracking all kinds of stuff. And I was loving working on this system. And I enjoy talking to people and helping them out over the phone, but it just really wasn't the thing that really lit me up. And for the really hairy stuff, since I had been there as long as I had been and kind of touched every system, if somebody needed to troubleshoot shoot something for one of our larger clients across the entire system, I was the person that was pulled in. And so I was kind of the last resort for tech support. And then there were some political things, and eventually I kind of got pushed off to the side, and they put somebody else in charge of the the support team. At which point I looked at him and said, "I want to be a programmer. What do I do?" And we kind of compromised, and I wound up in QA. Um, and I worked in QA for a while, and then eventually I left because it wasn't worth it. They had actually listed a job to hire a third person for our QA team, and that person was getting paid like 20 or 30% more than me. And when I confronted them about it and asked them about it, anyway, it's not worth going into, but there were some political things that went on, and so I left. And then I kept hearing from the people that were working for me about how bad things got afterward. Um, but I went on and I worked on another project. This was for a lead gen company, and there again I got to mentor some people. I was I didn't have any. No, I went to the consulting firm first. And let me tell you that this was the perfect setup for me to launch my career from. So there were a couple of things there, and I feel like I've had this in a couple of other places. And so I kind of want to talk about the commonalities between this and a couple of other places where I've worked, because this is kind of the ideal setup, and this is what I'm trying to create with JavaScript Geniuses, is to give people all of these things that you may or may not be getting wherever you're working. So one of the first things that happened is I went in for the interview, and when I went in for the interview, I did the kind of the who are you and what's your experience interview with the general manager of the consulting firm. And then he got their senior guy on the phone, and we did the technical interview over the phone. And so I'm sitting there next to this general manager guy, And I'm on the phone with this other programmer. And so he's asking me questions. And of course, right, I have, how much experience do I have in Ruby on Rails? Well, whatever I've been able to pick up on my own working at Mosey, right? So I answer the questions, and he asked me like, what are design patterns? And I'm like, I have no freaking idea. Right. And so then he explains it to me, and then I turn around and I say, "Oh, I gotcha." So like when Rails makes you do things in this way, that's a design pattern. He's like, "Yes." And so the interview kind of went like that. And so the interview was not like, I didn't show up knowing all of the things that they wanted me to know. I showed up basically with an open mind and was willing to learn. And he would explain something to me, and I would immediately connect it to other things. And so I wound up getting that job. I got basically a $20,000 a year raise. Um, and yeah, I got to work there with a bunch of other guys. Now, a lot of the guys at the company, there were like two or three of us that were doing Ruby on Rails. Most of the guys at the company were doing Java or C sharp. And there were a handful of people that were picking up Flash. And so the deal was is I got onboarded onto the same project as the guy that interviewed me. And so we wound up doing, I mean, we would pair program quite a bit. If I had any questions about anything, I literally would just call him and ask him, and he would walk me through it. My IT experience allowed me to help out the rest of the company with some of their stuff, right? So they had internal servers where they hosted the code using SVN, Subversion, which was the predecessor to Git. Eventually, everything moved to Git. But anyway, so all that work I was able to do too. And yeah, it was just kind of an ideal setup, because at the end of the day, if I had something that I needed to ask a question about, or I got stuck on anything, I had somebody to talk to. And when I'm putting things together for JavaScript Geniuses, I want the same thing, right? I want people to be able to come. We're doing weekly calls. I want people to be able to show up and say, "Hey, I've got a question. I ran into this thing with React or Express or whatever. um how do I handle this? How do I learn it? How do I fix it? How do I whatever?" Right? And I'd be able to have people there to answer their question and maybe walk through it, hold their hand through it a little bit. So and that was a major thing. And what's funny is like I worked for Public Engines. We ran crimereports.com, which is, if you go there now, it does the same thing, but it's not the same app. But I worked with David Brady, and he helped mentor me on a whole bunch of stuff. Right at that point, I was definitely not in a place where I had to ask questions. Excuse me. I was not in a place where I had to ask questions all the time and have my hand held on stuff. But occasionally there were some things where, for example, when I was trying to figure out if a point on the map, right, if I had latitude and longitude, was within the city limits of the city that was giving us the crime data, right? Or if it was within a certain precinct of the city. And so he's like, "Well, this is how we solve it," right? And he just kind of explained the algorithm to me, and then it was up to me to actually build it, right? And so it was stuff like that. Or, "Oh wow, I'm running into this problem." He he kept putting things into the tests, right? So I would go home at 5, and then he would stay and work until 7 or 8, and the test would start failing at 6 o'clock because we were GMT -6. And so the time zone stuff was screwing up, right? And so he'd leave a note for me in the test: "Chuck, fix your crap." And so I would go in and I would make some changes, and the test would pass. And so I would go home, and that was like a week. And then finally, he helped me figure out what those issues were, right? And so having that level of mentorship and having people that I could kind of come along with really helped. The other version of this that also made a major difference was I started going to the users group. And so Utah had a Utah Ruby users group. We're starting it up again. But at the time, we had one in Utah County, which is where I live, but I live basically all the way up on the north end. And so getting to Salt Lake County is not really that big a deal. They had another one in Salt Lake County on the southern end of Salt Lake County. So again, right, both of these were within 10-20 minutes of my house. Um, they had one downtown. They had one in um, Davis County or Weber County, I can't remember. And then they had one up in Cache County in Logan, which is like 2 or 3 hours away from here, right? So I didn't go to all of them, but I would go to the two that were closest to me, and sometimes get to downtown, which is half hour away in traffic. So just having that, right? And so people would be presenting on the latest stuff, and showing us what they were doing, and all of these things, right? It was a great place to just go and just compare notes. Um, Another thing that worked out for me was that in 2011 we started the Ruby Rogues podcast, and so I wound up on this call every week initially with Aaron Patterson, James Edward Gray, David Brady, Peter Cooper. I think there was somebody else, and then Aaron and Peter figured out pretty fast that showing up every week was a little bit too much with everything else they had going on. And so we wound up with Avdi Grimm, and Josh Susser came in and replaced those guys. And so I was like the junior guy by years in my career, on a call every week with these guys, and then whoever we got in as an expert, right? And so I could ask all my lower level questions, and I could get answers to them every week. And I was talking to people who were up on the latest things in Ruby, right? And then it was 8 months later we started JavaScript Jabber, right? And so I started picking up the same kinds of things from there. And so I started a freelancing show at the same time, because I had gone freelance in that window in September of 2011. And so again, I was getting that mentorship from guys that have been doing it a whole lot longer than me. And so this is what I'm trying to create with having the weekly calls, is just to give people, hey, look, we're going to bring in experts. We're going to have them walk through stuff. Right. You'll be able to learn, kind of like for what I got from the podcast, being on the podcast and showing up to the users groups. And then, if you get stuck or have any other questions, right, we can stick around afterward. I've scheduled these calls to run for an hour and a half, but we could stay a little longer if our guest is done answering questions about what they're expert in, and just see if we can help you with whatever you're running into. I've also played off and on, and it's probably going to end up as an add-on for the coaching, um, is having basically where you can text me or send me a message on WhatsApp and say, hey, Chuck, I'm stuck, right? And then I can either answer it because I know the answer, or because I've been doing the podcast so long, I can reach out to the people that I know and say, hey, so and so's running into this issue. What do you think? Right. And then they can point me in the right direction. I can give you an answer. So that's another piece of this, right? That kind of comes down to that mentorship level. So anyway, that was a major thing, just working with Nate and then working with Dave. I actually worked with Dave twice. I worked with him on a contract later on, and got the same kind of mentorship from him and a couple of the other guys that were working in that space. And that was on a financial medical billing app, right? So we got the best of both worlds. We had to do HIPAA and we had to do PCI compliance. But anyway, so that was major thing for me. I also heard about a conference that was going on, Mountain West Ruby Conference. Mike doesn't run it anymore, but I went out to that, right, and it was in Salt Lake, so I just showed up early because I was so excited to be there. So I remember walking into the Salt Lake City Library and sitting down in the auditorium right next to this other guy that was sitting there, and so we start chatting, and I'm like, yeah, I've I'm in my first programming job, and whatever. And so we start chatting, and I was like, okay, I've got a couple of programming questions if you're willing to answer them, because you seem like you know what you're doing. I didn't know he was speaking at the conference. And so he answers a bunch of my questions, and then at the end I figured out that this is who several of my friends were excited to see at the conference. It was Jim Wyrick. And in the Ruby community, he had written about half of the utilities to do the things that I was asking him about. And then, just being around people, I got invited to go to dinner with a bunch of, the speakers and stuff like that, just because I knew enough of the right people to get in the right rooms. And I have to say, I mean, really, a lot of this is stuff that you all can do. And I'm also hoping to be able to put together some of these summits so that, if you can't afford to travel to wherever the Ruby or the JavaScript conference is, right? You can't make it to the React conference, you can't make it to the Angular conference, you can't, right? It's like, hey, look, I can't afford the airfare, I can't afford to take the time off, I can't afford whatever, right? To give you the same kinds of opportunities where it's, hey, look, we're gonna have talks, we're gonna have a hallway track, right? We're gonna have Zoom calls where it's effectively, I'm going to sit down with a handful of other people and we're just going to chat over dinner, right? And so we'll have some dinner groups and things like that. And so I'm looking to put that together too. That won't be part of the membership, but you'll get a discount if you have a membership. But just create those, right? In the Ruby community, I'm looking to do the same thing because uh, Ruby Central, who has run RubyConf and RailsConf for the last, I don't even know how many years, 20 years, they announced that they weren't going to run RailsConf anymore, that this year, 2025, was going to be the last year. And so what they said is, we're not going to do a RubyConf this year. We're just doing RailsConf. And then in 2026, we're going to do RubyConf only. And so what I want to do is I want to put together a summit in the fall as a kind of a replacement for RubyConf this year, and just say, hey, look, if you want to come, right? But the other thing is I look at some of the other JavaScript conferences out there, and I just want to make a lot more of that, a lot more accessible, and not just on the level of, hey, you can watch the talks, right? I really want to give you an opportunity to go to the conference and rub shoulders with people as much as you can in a virtual environment. So anyway, but these are the major wins that I got from this. And then from there, as Ruby Rogues took off, as some of this other stuff kind of came around, then I was able to go to some of the bigger conferences, right? Incidentally, my podcasting career has kind of followed the same trajectory in a lot of ways, because I got in with enough of the right people early and had enough of the right opportunities to go to some of those big events. I actually was one of the people that funded um, Podcast Movement, which is the big podcasting conference now, when it started, 2014, um, right in Dallas, Texas, right? And so I got to rub shoulders with a whole bunch of them. I already knew some of the people in the space because we'd already been talking. And so again, I really want to give people the opportunity to get to know each other and find these opportunities. Um, so let's fast forward a little bit. Um, one of the high and low points of my more recent career was I worked at Morgan Stanley. And because I'd done the podcast and because I had been involved in the local community, it was right during the COVID stuff. So everybody was working from home. Morgan Stanley kept telling us they were going to have us come back to the office, but by the time I left, they still hadn't. And there were some political things going on there too, and I'm not going to get into all of that. Other than to say that eventually we had enough people leave from the group that I was working in that I had essentially taken on project management, team lead, and architecture for the application, and was just trying to get it over the line because it had started as a Groovy on Grails app, and they had never fully transitioned it. And so I kept telling them, look, um, we lost the guy that had written a lot of it in Grails. And so I was saying, look, we just need to transition this thing so we can even just maintain it. And so, I was setting the priorities and working through the processes and stuff until I eventually left them too. But when I went in for the interview essentially was them asking me all the questions about all the people I knew from the podcast, and talking to me about what it was like to run the podcast and stuff like that. They knew I was already capable. And so that's one other thing that I would like to kind of build into things, is to give you all the opportunity to kind of raise your flag and say, "Hey, I'm capable of doing this stuff." And you can know that by listening to my podcast or watching my screencasts or things like that, so that you can level up. And I guess I need to kind of rewind a little bit because back in the early days of my career, there were screencast series. One in particular was Railscasts, and Ryan Bates was putting those out. He started with one a week. He eventually went to two a week if you wanted to pay for the premium. I never quite understood why he stopped doing it because he was, the two videos a week. He had like 60,000 people paying him. And so, anyway, whatever the reasons were, it was a huge, huge boon to the community. And it made it really easy for people to figure out, okay, I want this kind of a thing. Here are a couple of videos I can watch. And there are video series out there now. What's funny to me is I don't see as many of them in JavaScript. I see courses on things like Pluralsight, but I don't see anybody just putting out a weekly video every week for something for JavaScript or React or anything. And so I'm looking to create that as well, right? So for JavaScript geniuses, I want to build an application. I want to put it up on Cloudflare Workers. I'm looking at using Supabase on the back end, right? So it's all mostly just front end ish, right? As much as possible, and just kind of make it as DDoS proof as possible. I'm fairly involved in Utah politics, and when we ran our caucus night, what we ran into was somebody who doesn't like the caucus system DDoSed our registration app. And so there were some places that just had some issues getting people registered for caucus that were legitimately there as members of the party. And so I just want to show people how to solve that. It's like, hey, look, if you have a part of your app that you want to peel off and make it so that it'll just run no matter who's throwing what at it, here's how you can use Cloudflare workers to do it. I also want to dive a whole bunch into the capabilities that are being built in now on the browsers and on mobile browsers so that you can use like Bluetooth and location services and stuff like that, and just show you how to build all that stuff in so that you have um, the PWA, Progressive Web App, that does a lot of this work for you so that maybe you do or don't need a native mobile app. And then if you do need one, then go bring something in like Turbo Native or Cordova or something like that, where you can put a wrapper around your app and get all that functionality without having to completely rewrite it in something like React Native. But then at the same time, there are advantages to React Native. And so if those advantages matter to you, it gets into that area. Well, it depends, right? What should I use this or that? Well, it depends, right? And so give people the capability of understanding, hey, you can do this, you can do that, you can build these kinds of apps. Yeah, I would love to just show people what you can do as a programmer and just open the gates on all that stuff. So that's the big direction I'm headed in. Um, but yeah, at the end of the day, it also gives me the opportunity to learn some of this stuff that I want to learn that I just it's like, okay, well, I can go build a toy app, but I've already explained to you that building a toy app just isn't my jam, right? I want to build a real app that makes a real difference for real people and be able to mentor other people by showing, hey, this is how I did it, right? That if you're stuck, that well, I got stuck there too. Here's how you unstick it. And so anyway, at the end of the day, that's the thing that I'm looking to build. So I don't know that I have a whole lot else to really explain. I mean, everything's up at javascriptgeniuses.com. And so I'm just going to roll in. I'm going to throw you some picks, and then um, we'll call it a day. So I always do that board game pick, and so one of the picks I want to pick this time is called Groundhog Day. It's based on the movie. So if you've ever seen Groundhog Day, the movie, right? He wakes up every day, and he kind of has to learn a new skill until he eventually has the perfect day, right? And then he graduates, I guess, and life goes on, right? He gets the girl. He does the thing for work. He gets all that stuff together. So It's a pretty simple game. Board Game Geek has it as a weight at a weight um, of 1.22 out of 5. So, right, pretty simple, pretty approachable game. I think we played it 2 or 3 times in an hour. So, I mean, just and the first time was basically two of my friends explaining to the rest of us how to play it. There were 5 of us playing. Um and yeah, it was pretty awesome. So effectively what you wind up doing is you have so many days to beat the game, right? I think there are like eight or 10 days, right? And each day you get fewer and fewer cards that you can play to have the perfect day. And the perfect day is you play all red cards, and all the red cards are worth 4 stars. And so each day you have to get more stars than the previous day, right? So the gray cards have 0 stars, the blue cards have 1 star, the um what was it? Orange cards had 2 stars, and then there was another color that had 3 stars. I think they were yellow. And so or hearts. They were hearts, not stars. But anyway, so each day has to have progressively more hearts. When you play a card on a day, it has to be higher than the previous card played on that day. There's 6 cards in a day. And anyway, so you kind of play off all your lower value cards first, and there's you don't take turns. So if you've got the next, so somebody plays the 1 of gray and you have the 2 of gray, you just play the 2 of gray. And I mean that's kind of how it all goes. So you just play it out and try and get that perfect day. Um, it took us a couple of tries to really figure it out, because if nobody has a card that you can play to complete the day, then you lose. If you can't make it add up to more hearts than the previous day, you lose, right? Um, and some of the yellow cards give you more red cards, and so you can't win without playing some of the yellow cards. But anyway, um, if you don't solve it by that last day, you lose. And basically, the way that we played it was that we wouldn't play any of the red cards until we felt like, and you can't talk to each other, so you just kind of have to guess. But we wouldn't play the red cards until we felt like we had a decent shot of making it based on where everybody was at. So everybody's kind of calculating the odds in their head. Okay, do we have 7 red cards between all of our hands? And what are the odds that we can get them out in the right order? So anyway, it was fun. It was really, really fun. I really enjoyed it. So I'm gonna go ahead and pick Groundhog Day, the game. Um, and the movie's funny too. So definitely worth checking out there. So um, let me paste it in here so that we can keep track of it. But yeah, and then we played more of the gang. I think I picked that last week, which is the kind of the poker game where you're playing Texas Hold'em poker as a team, and you're trying to get everybody in the order, from the best hand to the worst hand. Incidentally, when we played it this last time, there were 5 of us playing, and one of the hands, um, one guy had like 2 pair, and then everybody else's hand was effectively the same. And so all that had really mattered was that the guy that took the 5 star chip got the 5 star chip, because the rest of us, what you do is you score your hand based on, okay, I've got this many pairs, or and then the number of the pairs, and then it's just whatever your higher cards are. But it turned out that the hand that was on the table was the best hand for 4 of us, right? The cards that we had in our pocket, the 2 pocket cards, didn't change the hand we had because they were so low. And so that was kind of funny, because we were like, okay, who's next? And it was like, well, he's next because he has the next high, he has the next highest card. But then I was like, no, because his highest card doesn't figure onto the Texas Hold'em hand. Anyway, so that was fun. The gang is a fun one. A couple of other picks. My wife and I have been watching The Night Agent. Um, I don't. It's funny because a lot of times, if I can find some criticism like what I have for the show, yeah, I tend to not like it as much. But I'm really enjoying this one, in spite of it. What I'm finding is that a lot of the stuff in this show is fairly predictable, right? It's fairly formulaic. Um, but I'm enjoying it anyway. So definitely check out The Night Agent. We're watching the second season. I feel like the first season was a little bit less formulaic, just because the main protagonist wasn't like a trained operative, and so there was a lot of luck by the seat of your pants kind of stuff. So anyway, what else do I have to pick? I think that's about all I've got. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up here. I really appreciate you sitting through this episode. Um, and until next time, Max out.